Hey Lee,
What's up, Jedi?
how you doing?
Pretty good, man. How you been?
Good. For the listener, I met you last summer. Uh, I was having all sorts of aches and pains.
Hmm?
I realized as you get older, you just start falling apart. And so I met you, and you started doing treatment on me, and then you did treatment on my kids. And so I really appreciate that. And I think one thing a lot of us just don't understand the human body and how it works. And so for me, I realized when you are working out, you are causing trauma to your body.
Right.
Just as important as causing the stimulus, you also have to find a way to relieve some of that trauma that you're causing. And as we get older, men are more stubborn and realizing like you gotta take care of your body. It's not just about doing the activity, it's also about recovery. So basically I enjoy interacting with people and getting their life story and then hearing about what that individual does. So other people, maybe younger than you, can listen and be like, oh, I'm interested in that. That's something I could look towards doing. Or I just feel like there's a lot of young men right now that are kind of aimless, don't really know what to do. And if they can hear someone else's story, it can kind of give them an idea of like, okay, that's something I could follow that plan, or that is something I'm interested in. I want to try that. So let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about your childhood, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Niagara Falls, New York.
Mm.
So lived there for the first 10 years of my life. First home that my parents sold, it was sold for $28,000. I think it was probably like 1,100 square foot like house with a yard. As a kid, you don't really notice like the things that you have and have not.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that we were rich at any point, but I also wouldn't say that we were like poor.
Mm.
We always had everything we needed. My parents were always keeping us involved, like actively, like doing sports, doing things to, I think for their own sanity, keep us occupied with something.
Mm.
But also, I think it helped instill a lot of pride in us, like as kids. Like they made us really proud of ourselves. They always complimented us. They told us when we were doing things wrong, and oftentimes cordial way.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, like especially me, I was a pretty headstrong kid. I always did what I wanted to. I think I still carry that into my adulthood to some degree.
So you're like a kid in the 90s, right?
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
back then, we didn't have internet, we didn't have cell phones.
Mhm.
So what did you do as a child?
So my parents were the type where it was like go outside, don't come back till the sun comes down kind of thing,
Mm.
or like find something to preoccupy yourself. So I started playing football when I was like 6 years old.
Flag or tackle?
Tackle.
Wow.
Had a lot of big cousins, so we were always pretty rough, like playing with each other, which I think helps with getting into contact sports. So I was always liked contact.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I definitely played like baseball. Like my younger brother played soccer, but I didn't. My dad had a different taboo around soccer, which I think is like since the '90s, like kind of whittled away. It used to be like a grass fairies sport or like a girly sport to
That's
do.
funny.
But I wish I would have.
You like the more aggressive sports.
Yeah, I like the more aggressive sports, but I wish I had done soccer because it would have helped with my foot-eye coordination, would have helped me like later on in life as well with like wrestling and rugby and things like that. All around just well-rounded would have been, um, I think like my parents were really good at that. I mean, I was always good at school.
Mhm.
I had
So
like,
heavy into sports. It's super funny. Like every time I meet someone, you said you're from Niagara Falls. I lived out in Buffalo for a little period of time,
mhm,
so I'm very familiar with Niagara Falls.
yep,
And visited my brother-in-law lives on the Canadian side,
mhm, okay,
and so been to Niagara Falls multiple times.
yeah,
It's funny. It's like the more I do these podcasts, the more I realize you actually have a lot more in common with people than you think.
yeah. There's a lot more synchronicities in play. Like you don't just meet people by chance, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't think anything really happens by chance. I mean, I have pretty strong faith. I didn't necessarily always have that. But the more I live through life, the more I realize that things aren't really random that you might think would typically be random.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I lived in the Adirondacks for about a year.
Okay.
Experienced that extreme cold weather.
Beautiful up there, though.
Yeah, it's really pretty. That's funny that we have that connection from New York.
Yeah, without knowing it.
Yeah. So sounds like early childhood was just a lot of sports.
A lot of sports. My dad was in the military. He was in the Air Force for like 25 years.
So is there a base out there in Niagara?
Yeah, so he was in the reserves by the time like I was born. He started in the Army for like 3 or 4 years and moved down to the Air Force once the kids were getting older. So
So
it's
is
like
he active Army then?
so he was active Army and then he turned in reserves for Air Force like after my sister was born.
Was there a reason why he made that switch from Army to Air Force?
I assume because it's I mean, the funny thing is, I got uncles that are in the Army and things like that. So, and the Navy and whatnot. And they refer to the Air Force as the chair force because it's a lot less strenuous on the body. There's a little bit more, I guess, amicable housing and things like that.
Yeah.
Like my dad went over the sandbox a couple times, like during like the War on Terror, things like that. And he was always staying in like air conditioned tents and like they had pool. It was like sound like a resort the way he would describe it. Every Wednesday they'd have like steak and lobster.
He wanted a higher quality of life.
Yeah,
It's
basically.
funny. Again, I was in the Army, and we used to joke that if an Air Force guy has to live in an Army base, he gets hazard pay
Right.
because the quality of life is less. Or when I went to start taking college courses, you have to go to a center, and he looked at my test and he's like, "You're a fool." And I was like, "Why?" He's like, "Why'd you join the Army? You could have joined the Air Force."
Right.
Like, I didn't know back then. They didn't tell me.
Right.
But that's funny.
They're definitely not all created equally. My dad was doing like medevac stuff, so he's also pretty gnarly things, but he wasn't necessarily like in like the crap.
Was he a medic?
He wasn't a medic. He was more so like coordinating care. So like overseas when he was doing the War on Terror stuff, he was stationed in like Oman or Qatar. They'd have people fly out there, and then he would decide like, do they need to go to Germany? Do they need to go back home like immediately, or can they stay here?
When you were a kid, did you think about joining the military?
Oh yeah, I almost joined the Air Force Academy. So that was a funny.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, when your dad's and you see your dad being in the military, I'm sure that because a lot of guys, it's different now in 2024, but probably a good portion of if you looked at soldiers, they had a close relative that was in the military or their dad.
Pretty much every like male in my family was in the military or like a police officer. Then we had a couple other uncles that we never really met that were always in prison. So pretty diverse family structure.
Yeah. So teenage years, more just sports.
Lots of sports. My parents got divorced when I was like 12.
So how was that experience?
That was tough. That was definitely, I was the one that saw most of the fights. Like my brother and sister had different school schedules than I did. So I would be like there in the midst of it all, which was not very fun for me. But
do you feel like they used you kind of as a buffer sometimes?
not necessarily. I think they forget that I was there sometimes. Like in their arguments, like rather than like taking it outside or like being in a more controlled scenario where they would go back and forth at each other.
And you're old enough to be able to process stuff. And when you're like 5 or 6, you know something's not right.
Right.
When you're 12 or 13, like even when my son sees me interact with my wife, like he's very observant. He can see all that.
Oh yeah.
So you're processing all that.
Yeah, you're processing it all, and it more so led to me like just feeling more into sports and like hanging out with my friends more, which was good and bad. Mostly like during my young teenage years, I was like kind of like a golden child, like very like goody two shoes type, like very averse to like anything that was overtly bad, like drug use or alcohol use, things like that. And that was like pretty much just carried me through, like was just being like really ingrained in sports, being like a high level wrestler in high school, things like that.
So would you spend like thinking back on those high school years, like how many hours a week would you spend? Like, I'm sure you had different seasons throughout the year. So wrestling season, how much were you training?
So wrestling season was like pretty tough. Be usually at least like 2.5, 3 hours of practice a day, like every day. We'd have like matches on Wednesdays, tournaments on Saturdays, Sundays sometimes.
As an adult looking back on that now, do you think that's almost too much? Or you think that is a fair amount?
I was really passionate about it. So like I loved it, every part of it.
I know you loved it, meaning do you think it was healthy for the body? I don't know the answer to that. I'm curious. I'm thinking back for my sons as they get older and how much, because we understand wear and tear now, right? When you're young, does the body just recover faster? So it's like they can because there's such a thing as overtrain.
Right.
But is that not such a thing you have to be as concerned about? I don't know.
With younger kids, I think there's more capacity for work. I mean, I think kids are pretty resilient. Like you've seen it like with your sons, like it takes like 1 or 2 treatments to fix things
Right.
that like for you.
Well, the other day they're
take
like,
longer,
"Oh,
right?
this." I was like, "You'll be fine."
Right.
Because now they know you're a resource. So my son's like, "My arm hurts." I'm like, "Dude, you're fine."
Yeah. But like I think it ultimately like you learn like what you're capable of. Like you can harden a person if you harden them from an earlier age and they stay hard the rest of their life.
Mm.
So like going through like losses or like hard workouts, like things like that, you more so just push your ceiling up rather than like I guess expose yourself to pain and suffering. Like I started going to chiropractor when I was 9. So I always like when it was like in the middle of seasons, like whether it was football, wrestling, or rugby, I would usually go to the chiropractor like once a week, sometimes, especially before games or matches or tournaments, just because I want to feel at my best.
So maybe that was the thing I didn't get when I was heavy into sports at a young age was recovery.
Hmm.
And so maybe you're saying recovery is a big part of it if you're going to be pushing yourself
Yeah,
at extreme level at such a young age.
I think so. Like when you're younger, you need less recovery. When
Mhm.
you're older, I would say like once you hit 25, you probably have to recover just as much, if not more, than you
Yeah,
train.
for sure.
Um, I used to train like, especially in the gym, even like in college, like I'd be training sometimes like 6 hours a day, like between practice and lifting and
Yeah.
like just doing um, just active things to fuel that ability.
So you're not so worried about training too much in your teenage years.
Not so much in teenage years. I mean, there's definitely like a point where you have like overuse injuries, but it's more like recognizing like, oh, this has been around for like a fair amount of time. This is probably an injury. It's not just something that's going to go away.
Mm.
Not to say that I never had injuries, but I never had any serious injuries until I like got in my 30s, realistically.
Mm.
And I think having like the soft tissue work that we can get, chiropractic, PT, stuff like that. Started college when I was 17, so I was athletic training. I already kind of knew a lot of rehab stuff, so I could take care of a lot of things on my own, and or be in a a scenario where like a lot of people around me wanted to do the same thing, where they wanted to help people perform and help them to rehab.
Yeah, that's something I definitely want to do with my boys because I love my parents, but they just didn't understand that world. Like
Hmm.
my mom, she questioned why even exercise in the first place. It's like
Yeah.
that's a hurdle in of itself, just to be like exercise is good for you. And then I just didn't understand the recovery side. Where with my boys, obviously, I'm going to be able to help them optimize their training, but then also help them with the recovery side, which I didn't get. So I'm excited for them to get into that phase of life where I can be more involved and understand some of the science stuff behind it as well.
Well, the sooner you can build those habits,
Mhm.
the more ingrained they are like in your life, where you
Yeah.
just think about like, oh, I need to stretch, or I need to do lacrosse ball release, or I need to get chiropractic done, or I need to go do PT,
Yeah.
things of that sort.
Like one thing, because there's NBA playoffs right now, so they're just watching a little bit more TV than normal,
Hmm.
which is like, hey, we're going to be doing the knee stretches, the knees to toes guy, whatever that guy is.
Hmm.
So I'm going to start having them like if you're watching something, that's the perfect time to do some of the boring stuff. It's good, but boring.
Right.
And so just incorporating that into their lifestyle now.
Right. It's that habit, right? Like knowing that you have time, you might be multitasking, but ultimately you have the time to do it.
Right.
A lot of people, that's like one of the bigger things that we see in the office where people are like, oh, it's hard for me to find time to do it. Like, obviously, a lot of people have kids and things like that. So there's different responsibilities that have to be taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you, as the parent, can show your kid, like, oh, I do this because of this,
Mm-hmm.
then they start to go, like, oh, well, I should do this. Like, my back hurts or like my legs hurt. I was running around all day with my friends, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. So that's good perspective. As I consider my boys as they get a little older, don't be so. I think repetitive. I think repetitiveness. So that's a danger, right? If you're just dribbling
Mhm.
or you're doing the same motion every day, it's probably something to watch out for. But
Absolutely.
don't be afraid of putting stress under the body. Because I remember back in high school, like I did cross country and soccer at the same time. So
Hmm.
I would go do a morning run by myself, and then I'd go train soccer for 2, 3 hours in the afternoon. I could do that work capacity, and that in and of itself maybe isn't a bad thing because the body can handle that.
I
I
think
would say.
that's a great thing. I mean, again, like the more you can test yourself at a young age, the higher your ceiling is going to be like once you're older.
Hmm.
Like obviously, like some people have like superior genetics and they're just like freaks.
Right.
Like if you look at any professional like sports league, like those are the freaks. Those are
Right.
the elite of the elite. That's the 1% of the 1%.
Hmm.
And they got there one by being genetically gifted, but also from hard work. Every single one of them.
Right. So when you got 17, 18, you said you started college at 17. What was your thought process as you were finishing high school into college? Was there a specific, did you know at that point in time what you wanted to do? Or is it just, I'm really good at this sport? I guess, what sports did you specialize in?
So more so special, like wrestling was my sport, like in
Okay.
high school. I started playing rugby my senior year. I wish I'd played it sooner because I would have realized like my passion and love for it.
Yeah.
But wrestling was like a big part of my life. Like by the time I graduated high school, I was wrestling like 8 to 9 months out of the year.
Mm.
So
And with wrestling, you do weightlifting, you do cardio, and
mhm.
then it's just on the mat.
Yep.
Yeah, because that's wrestling is probably one sport where you actually get good at multiple different disciplines. For some other
Yeah.
sports, you don't necessarily get that strong,
Hmm.
or they'll only focus on one thing or the other. Where wrestling, you want good endurance and you want good strength. So I would say that is a good exercise.
Wrestling is the number one like conditioning sport you can do.
Yeah,
Like you're using every muscle all the time. And to do that for like 2, 3 hours at a time, like your body's capacity for work increases exponentially.
and you also understand one thing a lot of Americans fail to understand is how to control their body weight.
Right.
So you can learn that through wrestling because you got to cut, probably a little bulk.
Mhm.
So explain that to me. There was a certain weight class you wrestled in, right?
Yeah.
So when you didn't have like, did you just consistently stay near that, or was there periods of time where you bulked up a little bit and then you would cut?
So like off seasons, you usually wrestle like different weight class than what you wrestle in season.
Mm,
But my senior year, I ballooned up anywhere. I would wrestle anywhere from like 112 to 130, which is like
that's a lot.
4 or 5 different weight classes.
Yeah.
So because I was like senior member of the team, I was a captain from like my sophomore year onward for wrestling. Um, if my coach needed me to be at a certain weight to wrestle a certain kid that he had, like basically had the thought process that somebody wouldn't be able to win, like to help the team, he'd be like, "Hey, I want you at this weight today."
So how would you control that? Talk me through that.
I'm really good at like you kind of build like your ability to lose weight very rapidly. Like there'd be some trainings where I could lose 10 pounds in 2 hours, 3 hours, just because you're training hard. You have the intention of losing the weight, but you also know that I need to be working this entire time.
Is your coach also making sure you're not over or depleting a resource?
I wouldn't say the high school coach was at all. No, like he
So
was
that's
more of
kind
like
of like
a,
on you and your parent, because I'm sure some boys get into that and it can get unhealthy.
oh, absolutely. I would say it was probably unhealthy my senior year, just because of my ability to balloon up and then balloon down. Like as the course of the year went on, it gets harder and harder to like maintain your weight if you're doing that. So
Yeah, if you have eating disorders in wrestling, that's not very good.
yeah, I would say that I probably would have been classified as like anorexic at some portions. Like there was days where I would fast for multiple days and just drink water, and
But how are you strong enough?
it's very interesting. Like you hit this point of like almost euphoria, where it's just like for work you're just a machine.
Yeah.
So like there'd be some days in my senior year, especially where I would practice for 3 hours and then I'd go run an extra 5 miles afterwards, like outside, like in the cold of Buffalo. You just drop weight like so rapidly. Figured out how to like sleep off weight more effectively too. There'd be some nights where I could sleep off 3 pounds, and already being at a low body fat, that's pretty crazy.
What do
Um,
you think your body fat percentage is when you're at 112?
that was sub 4%.
That's not,
That's not sustainable.
yeah, it's not healthy.
Um, but I even could reach that like in college when I was eating like whatever I wanted to, working out. Just like the amount of work that I was putting in would burn off fat.
Yeah.
Um, I'm
You
usually
really
pretty
understand
lean.
you really understand how the practicalities of losing and cutting, or cutting and bulking,
Yeah,
which most people don't understand.
right.
So that is a something, a good discipline to know for sure. So looking back, would you look back fondly on your high school?
Yeah, definitely. I wish I would have had a little bit more freedom. My parents were, I wouldn't say strict, but they were very protective, which looking back on it, I'm happy for. I think I would have probably, I'm the type to push the line always.
Mm-hmm.
And if knowing that the line was mom, like that's very unlikely line to push for me, especially just knowing her. She was a little bit of a bear when we were younger. She's like the greatest woman, an angel now, a guardian angel for me. But definitely was like a little bit hard on us, a little bit strict, made us like think before we did stuff. So very interesting. But I think like that structure and like that strictness also led to like putting your energy and your passion into something that was like controllable and like not necessarily easy, but like safer.
So you probably weren't aimless when a lot of kids right now, when they're turning 17 to 19, they're pretty aimless. Sounds like you weren't.
No, I
You
mean,
wanted.
I was either like hanging out with friends or playing sports. Those were like my two activities like as a youth.
Yeah, no scrolling on TikTok for 8 hours.
No scrolling on the phone. I mean, I didn't have a cell phone until like my 7th grade year, and that was only because I was wrestling a lot. My parents were like, "Call us when you need to get picked up," basically. So, um, I was never really that big into video games. I had my Game Boy taken away from me in 2nd grade because I got some bad grades one semester, and then my parents took it away for a whole semester, and grades went back up, and then they gave it back to me, and I just had lost passion for playing it at that point.
Yeah.
So, um, also gave me insight on like habits and stuff like that because of that. It's like, well, this isn't like the best thing for me. I don't even really care about this that much. It's just more like when you're in the thing, you want to stay in the thing. But if it gets removed from you, like for something out of your control, like your parents take it away or like you move away, you can't do a certain thing. You gain perspective on like, oh, I lost a lot of time doing that. I'd rather go outside and play or read a book or something like that.
Something I've been thinking about a lot is because I have kids and um, sports to me has been a primary way for my kids to experience healthy trauma, which is losing, working hard, struggle, right? When we do resistance training, what are we doing? We're causing trauma to our muscles and hopefully it recovers, right? Outside of that, it's like, I don't know how, I guess if you're into drama, if you're into that kind of stuff, you have to be put in some, you have to be, as a child, it's healthy to have some kind of resistance put on you, which then forces that child to overcome it. And I don't know if kids are getting that resistance today.
I'd say less so now than previous generation, but I think every generation will say that.
Yeah.
It's just different types of stress. Whether it is that you want to be like the best drama kid or the best poet or like math or you want to be a great sports star, it takes a lot of work and a lot of like passion and drive to do that. So I think like the more beneficial thing is like instead of being like I want to be good at this thing, is to just have like that mental confidence and fortitude, self-esteem to push through things when they go wrong.
Yeah.
Which I think wrestling helped me with.
Wrestling does have 100%. I tried wrestling. This was in between. This is my senior year. I'd never wrestled before, and I don't even know why. I guess I tried because my brother Bart did wrestling at the same school, so I was like, oh, I'll go try it. And I was like, I was strong, but as you know, it's more technique than anything.
Yeah.
And like I can outstrength people, but it was just like if you don't have the technique, it's really not that fun.
Right.
But it's exhausting. It's
so
terrible. Exhausting. I was just like, I'd rather just go run 5 miles.
Right. Well, it's like you start off by like wanting to, I guess, dominate the other kid, but you ultimately learn over the process that it's more a fight against yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's like if you can go into that dark place, hang out there, and then come out of it, it's like it's a very euphoric feeling.
So
it's very
like
self-empowering.
You watch?
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I just never enjoyed. I don't care if other people fight. For me, I don't get anything out of it.
Well, there's a portion of my, especially college life, where I was really considering strongly going into that more, like doing BJJ, doing wrestling, things like that, playing rugby. I just never got into like striking, like formal striking.
Yeah.
Which I wish I had gotten into Muay Thai.
I'm curious, since you probably more aware of that world. For every guy that does well, how many guys get damaged or permanently hurt or have significant injury? Is it pretty low
in regards to wrestling?
Or the striking sports?
So I think the biggest issue that we had, like you see like in striking sports, is that people will injure themselves because of bad technique.
Yeah.
Well, they'll do too much too soon and they'll break their wrist or their hand or something like that. And that recovery period of not doing the thing anymore, some people get set off where they're just like, well, is this even worth doing anymore? So I think it's pretty high likelihood that you're going to get injured doing any combat sport or contact
Right.
sport.
Which is probably a reason why I've avoided it myself.
Right. But I think like that danger is what kind of draws people to it at the same
Yeah.
time. Like they overcome something that normal person in quotations wouldn't do.
Yeah. All right. So dialing into 17, 18 version of you.
Yeah. So 17, 18, like my junior year, me and my buddy, he ended up going to the Air Force Academy. Both decided that we wanted to do the Air Force Academy. His dad was in the Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force. Had a lot of connections.
Did your dad encourage that? Did you have conversations with him? Did he tell you don't do it or do it or?
I think my parents just let me do whatever I wanted to. Like ultimately, if it was a good decision, it was a good thing, then they'd be like, if you want to chase that, chase it. Um, until the recruiter came over my house, and then my mom like had like kind of an episode, which was very like took us all back because she had not let go.
Because now you're living, were you splitting time between both parents?
No, so I was living with my mom primarily, but I would see my dad like all the time. Like my parents had a pretty amiable relationship where he'd come over, we could have family dinner and do like kind of the same stuff that we would typically do.
He just wasn't living there.
He just wasn't living there.
So I'm sure being in her mind, she's like, I married a military guy. I don't want it. You would have turned into a military guy.
Well, that was it entirely because my dad was always traveling a lot. And my mom, like, especially with the war on terror going on at that point, like, I think we were just entering Iraq. My mom was like, I'm not doing this for another 30 years,
What
basically.
year was that?
It was like 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
It was 2008 when the recruiter came over because it was like literally like that was my only plan for college.
It's interesting. He went to your house.
Yeah, so they came over. I mean, I was like a high, I say high level recruit just because my dad was in the military. I had really good grades. I really wanted to do that. That was the only thing that
Did
I
you think
thought I would
about
do.
doing something in the special world, like PJ or Rangers or SEALs? Was that a thing that you ever thought about, or you just thought about Air Force?
I really wanted to just fly fighter jets. Like that was like the big thing for me.
Yeah.
Like if I could, at this point in my life, if I would be flying like an F-22 Raptor. That would have been my goal.
Yeah. So he came over, and then your mom said no.
So yeah, they came over. It was a woman actually, and she was like very cordial about it. Like explained the whole process, this and that. It comes down to signing the papers, and all of a sudden my mom's just like, no, like I'm not signing these papers because I'm 17.
Yeah.
So like I need both parents' signatures in order to do this, or I have to wait a whole year. Which, if you're a year out of high school, the likelihood you're going to get into the Air Force can be really low at that point. So my mom kind of had a little episode where she was just like, I didn't expect you to actually do this, like this and that, like blah blah. She just lost it for like 10 minutes, and we were all just sitting there like at the table. The recruiter's like eyes are wide, and we're all just not talking for like 2 minutes. And
Was your dad there, mom?
my dad was there, and he's just like shaking his head, kind of thing. He didn't expect. Nobody expected it. I think my mom was just like pretty much like once you figured out like what we're going to do for the next 5 years, I figured you would say no, kind of thing. Which I was just like, I like the structure. I like pushing myself. Like, was in very good shape at the time, of course, just from wrestling and whatnot.
Yeah.
Had like a sub 5 minute mile without training running ever. It was just from running for wrestling, basically, where I had that.
Yeah.
So it was just it's a very interesting time.
So ultimately, it didn't happen because of her.
No, it didn't happen.
Did you have resentment towards her after that, or did you you just hit the college scene and you kind of moved on?
I think there might have been like a little bit of resentment for like a week, but like after that, like
Pretty short lived.
it was pretty much like wrestling season right in.
Yeah, because you had something. I think sometimes when some people have disappointment, if you don't have the next thing to move into, then you can live in that.
Right.
And for you, it's like, okay, move on with life.
Yeah, I was just moving on because like at that point I had a bunch of letters from colleges for like co-immersion wrestling, like all different walks, like anywhere from NAIA to Division I. I was getting letters like pretty much weekly.
Wow.
Of like, hey, like
So you're pretty good at wrestling.
Kind of want you to come.
Were you ranked in the state?
Yeah, I was ranked in the state. I went to states my senior year. My junior year, I like really like fumbled hard. I was coming up through the ranks. I was beating everybody that was like supposed to be really good. I was a favorite to like win and go to states and probably place at states. And then the regional tournament before states, I just had like the worst tournament I've ever had.
Looking back on it, was it a mental thing? Why do you think that happened?
Oh, I think it was totally mental. I have like a big and something I still could struggle with is like fear of failure, which ultimately I've realized is like that fear of failure keeps you from actually reaching your apex. Rather than like you're actually going to fail, it's more so going to keep you from hitting the level of things that you want. And like goal setting, like the goals for me is like, I want to do this. And then like after you hit that thing, it's like, oh, well, what's next? And I'm kind of like me, I'm never, wrestling teaches you flow where you're like flowing into the next move. If like you try something, it doesn't work, you go to another thing, blah, blah. But for goal setting, it's not, I was never coached on that of like, oh, like your goal should be, you should always recognize when you're hitting a level so that you can make a next goal or next 3 goals after you've already got to that point. And just because of like when you hit your goal, like you don't really know what to do at that point because you're like, oh, well, I'm doing what I want to do. And then it's like, well, there's still more to go.
Yeah. There's a guy, it's sometimes it's easier to see things from extreme cases, but this guy's whole life wanted to be an astronaut.
Mm-hmm.
He became an astronaut, went to the moon, and then at 29, the rest of his life was depressing
Right.
because he hit his peak, and that's common with a lot of athletes.
Mm-hmm.
They hit their peak, they got to the MLB, NBA, whatever it is, and then they're done at like late 20s, and they're like, well, now what? My whole life has been focused on this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I peaked in my late 20s, nothing else in my like. You went to the moon. Like, what else can you literally went to the moon? And so you're right in saying like, goals are good, but they can't also just define you.
They have to evolve. Yeah.
Have other things in your life because you can't just keep going. I've been thinking about this more. In America, we're always about getting bigger, stronger, faster. And now, the older I get, I'm not going to get bigger. I'm not going to get stronger. And I'm not going to get faster. And I'm okay with that because now my game now is longevity.
Right.
When you're young, how much stronger can I get? How much leaner can I get? How much faster can I get? But you do get to a point physically, you just physically can't get that much better.
Right.
Because it's just not a thing, right? You can tweak certain things. But that's interesting about the mind thing with wrestling. So you're getting offers to colleges. How'd you know which college to go to?
So I ended up like not even going the wrestling route, obviously. I played college rugby. So my parents were just like, find something you want to do.
So why did you not
do that?
Pursue wrestling?
I was kind of burnt out. Best offer I got was to go to Duke. And that was like if I was going to wrestle in college, it was going to be like Division I, or it was going to be at a school that had athletic training like involved in their curriculum. So once my senior year ended, it didn't end the way I wanted it to. I wanted to be a state champ, but I ended up like having just a bone saw. Ran into a couple of those like at the state tournament, kids that were like all Americans multiple times in college and things like that.
So let me ask you this question. I asked this other guy. So he was a Canadian swimmer, and some of his friends did go to the Olympics as Canadian swimmers. And I asked him, you were both putting the same amount of training in. What separated you from him? If you're both putting the same amount of training in, and he's like, it's just genetics. Because we're both doing the same thing.
Right.
It's just some people can unlock that whatever phase that other people can't.
Well, I think
say that was for you, or could you have? Is there something you could have done that got you to that level?
I think it was just the amount of time that I was in wrestling, because I didn't start wrestling till 6th grade. So all the kids that I'd run into like in the state tournament wrestling when they were like 4 or 5, that's when they started.
So for them, you probably wrestling, it was second nature, but it was just more internal for them.
For them, it's like just having that amount of mat time and experience, I think, was more the difference.
So you wouldn't even blame it on genetics?
No, I wouldn't say genetics or even hardness. I think it's more like obviously like in wrestling, like you can either be overly technical or you can just beat the crap out of the guy.
Yeah.
And the best ones are both, which was my goal, like going into high school, and especially like once you meet the right coaches, like now there's like so much freedom of information. Like you could just watch a YouTube video or you could buy like a webinar. Then like there wasn't really that. You couldn't do that. Yeah, you had to find a coach that was like college wrestler or like Olympic level wrestler and then learn from them. And then the amount of time that you're with them is indicative for how much you learn and how much you progress and grow. So I was lucky enough in high school to have one of our assistant coaches was a really great wrestler. He was like a 2-time state champ in New York. He wrestled D1, terrible grades in college, so I ended up going to community college close by and was our coach. I think he was a national champion in community college, JUCO. Um, but ultimately, like watching him was more so learned like this dude has all this potential, but like he's holding himself back because he's not applying himself to other parts of his life. He's just I wrestle instead of like reading books and
Yeah,
like
that was
getting the
like,
grades necessary.
yeah,
Um,
interesting. So wrestling didn't work out the way you wanted to your senior year. You just went to college.
but just didn't finish the way I wanted it to. And it was like more so one of those things where I kind of had like this moment of clarity and like epiphany, like after I had my last loss at state tournament, where I was just like, I'm here. Like this was my goal, but like my goal should have been to like do further, like to win and to like move on and like wrestle in like the off season, maybe go to like nationals and like get a place, something like that, if possible.
You know, another reason why I could never wrestle,
Hmm.
I couldn't wear the singlets.
Yeah,
It's just
I like
I wear it one time and I was like, this is the stupidest thing. I'm good. I think that's why, because I forget what sport the school did at the same time. Because there's another, because my senior year I did soccer, rugby, cross country, track, and I think wrestling was, I don't know. I put the uniform on. I was like, this is not working out.
No, well, you kind of like learn to love it.
Yeah,
Like,
for sure. But so when you went to college, did you know what you wanted to learn?
yeah, so I ended up falling into like a top 5 school in the nation for athletic training. Like the president of like our major was the president of the certification board. So like knew all the testing parameters. Our vice president of our major was the VP for drug testing for the NCAA.
Hmm.
We had like one of the top researchers in the NCAA like at our college. So it the college was 15 miles away from my hometown. So it ended up being like something I walked into and then realizing once I was in it, like, oh, I actually like fell into like probably the best scenario possible.
So where'd you live for your teenage years? Because you said you were in Niagara first 10.
So moved from Niagara Falls when I was 10 to Grand Island, which is in between Buffalo and Niagara Falls. The Niagara River goes around Grand Island.
So you're
So
still in New York.
yeah, still in New York.
So you probably are familiar with I'll have to think of the name that I stayed in. Keep talking. But there's a little town that I stayed in just south of Buffalo.
Yeah, so like there's like Lake Shore and like Lackawanna, like all that. The South towns, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, there's I'm trying to this was a 13 years 14 years ago when I lived in that little town, but
Yeah.
I remember running. People looked at me funny because
Mhm.
like, who goes running out here?
Right.
A, primarily white,
Hmm.
and then B, people just don't go out and exercise for fun.
Yeah.
So they saw me and they're like trying to run me off the road.
Well, South Buffalo is like an interesting place. It was very that was like South Buffalo
Forestville.
when I grew up. Forestville, yeah, that's deep. I don't even know where that is.
Yeah.
Like, so there's a lot of those South towns, very predominantly white. A lot of I would say racism going on there.
Probably. I just, I didn't care to look for it. I didn't care to me, it didn't bother me. It was just, I remember running on the road and people looking at me like, why is this kid running on the
Right.
road?
What is this kid doing?
Who runs? And it's like,
Right.
it's good for you.
Well, everybody's like impoverished there, so I feel like everything was just trying to maintain what they had.
Yeah. My first job, real job, was stocking cigarettes on an Indian gas station reservation.
Yeah.
So people would drive hours
Yeah.
to come buy cigarettes and gas.
Yep. Seneca's
Indian
probably,
reservation. Yeah.
which are like a big national brand now. It's really interesting. Saw them in the gas station like a couple years ago. I was like, wait, like I
Yeah,
know that
so
brand.
that first job taught me like make sure you do a job you enjoy, because I did that for a few months. Now it's like, man, some people do a job they hate for the next 40 years.
Hmm.
I did it for 2 months and I was like, this is miserable.
Right.
But continue.
So lived on Grand Island like throughout my teenage years, before moving to Buffalo because I stayed like on campus at school, and then after that I never lived permanently like in Grand Island again, because I went from living at Canisius College around the area there, and then moving over to Seneca Falls for chiropractic school.
So you just you knew because you had experience with chiropractor, you enjoyed the heart of athletics. So
Mhm.
that was just a drive that you had.
Yeah.
And you knew that all throughout college. Because I think so many kids go to college without
Mhm.
knowing what they want to do, and they
Yeah.
get some dumb degree. I meet so many kids, and they're like, "Yeah, I went to college, didn't know what I want.
Mhm.
Now I have this useless degree, and I'm working at Starbucks."
Well, yeah, like my degree, it's like more vocational rather than like bookwork.
Hmm.
Like I graduated with 3,000 hours of experience in athletic training, which you need 1,000 hours to do the test,
Hmm.
like to get your board certification.
What was your actual degree? College degree?
Athletic training.
Okay, so that is a degree.
Yeah, it's bachelor's in science through in athletic training.
Mm.
So I had like a minor in human health performance too. So learned a little bit of like the exercise physiology portion, like how to test and like do lab stuff, which I realized like I don't want to work in a lab. Um,
You want to
luckily,
be a Huberman?
yeah, I didn't want to be a Huberman, although it wouldn't be a bad deal with how much he's
Doing pretty
blowing
good
up.
right now.
Yeah, he's doing pretty good.
He got a hit. Did you see the hit piece they did on him recently?
No, I haven't seen it.
So he's like the internet's husband, right? Every woman wants him as a husband
Right.
because he's just crushing life. And so
Or it looks like he is.
yeah, from the outside. And so the media did a hit piece on him, and they're like, this guy in his late 40s is dating multiple women and getting it.
Mhm.
And every single man's like, and that's a bad thing,
Right. Yeah.
And like that's just promote like obviously what he's doing is working. Like
Right.
how many dudes in their 40s are crushing life like that?
Right.
So it's kind of funny because they try to make it seem like a bad thing, and they're like,
Mhm.
sign. All the single dudes are like, sign me up. I'm going to do that protocol.
Well, I'm pretty sure he's been married before, so he's like,
I don't know if he's been married.
no.
I don't think he ever got married.
Well, he's just doing his own thing then.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I don't hate on him. It was just funny because they wrote the article to try to shame him,
yeah.
and all it did was get more single dudes to be like, sign me up,
Right.
right?
Well, especially this day and age, it's kind of hard to like find the person that you want to live the rest of your life with. So
Yeah. But anyways, so that's cool that you knew what you wanted to do, and you went and did it.
right.
And I think that's part of if you do go to college, at least have a purpose for it.
Right.
Because if you don't, I don't know how beneficial it is.
Well, for me, it was more like being in the experience. Like, knew I wanted to work with athletes, but like, luckily, we had some really good sports teams. Like at the college when I was working, we had also like affiliations with University at Buffalo and the Buffalo Bills, so you could do like more expansive things, like work with them. End up working with like Khalil Mack and Brandon Oliver and Steve Means, like a lot of some big NFL guys that were in. Khalil Mack's still in the league.
When you get to that level of sports, what separates those guys from from just the everyday what separates like a D2 to D1 to even is it a mind thing? Is it a that's something I haven't fully been able to really answer. Is like what separates is it something can a D1 get to a D can a D like 3 or 2 get to a D1, or is it lack of effort, or is it just genetics?
I'd say mostly it's genetics.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of insane to watch like a freshman coming into college for football and then seeing them a year later. Like there was one guy that I remember, I can't remember his name, but he was a defensive tackle at University of Buffalo. He came in like as a freshman. He was like 6'1", 220 pounds, like not a small guy, like not impending, but also like everybody around you is like way bigger. He ended up redshirting. I saw him a year later for spring ball. He was like 6'4", 290. So
Yeah,
it's like you can't teach that.
Yeah.
Um,
So sometimes it's just luck.
well,
Genetics.
it's also the training. Like I don't know what they feed their guys like or like how they feed them, but like they train in a certain way that makes people massive and bigger. And like and even in those scenarios, like there's a difference between like a Khalil Mack and like a guy that's just on the team that like
Yeah.
walked on. Like Khalil Mack was one of the scariest individuals I've ever like met and worked with. Like I don't think he said more than 10 words to me in like a year and a half time. But you could just tell that he was like on a different level than everybody
Yeah,
else
it's
around.
like LeBron's one of his famous lines, just built different.
Yeah,
And I don't think that should discourage people from participating in athletics or sports,
no.
but just have the realization that like some people are just built that way.
Hmm.
Great, maybe you can learn some techniques or tips from them, but um, they're just built different.
Well, there's just different aspects that you can do, like when you look at sports. There's genetics, there's ability, athleticism, and then there's drive.
Yeah,
And like you can compensate for any one that you don't have with the other two.
hmm
If you have all three, then you just have to carry through and keep doing your thing day in, day out. I would say somebody like Khalil Mack, I think he was a 2-star recruit coming out of high school. I think he was like 6'1", 240, 230, 220, 230 when he came into college. Ended up graduating at like 6'6", 290 pounds. So it's like if he would have just been like, I'm a 2-star recruit, I'm probably not doing anything, nothing would have happened. But like to be the 5th overall pick out of like University at Buffalo, which is in the MAC, it's not like a prestigious football school.
Right.
That took a lot of drive and work
Yeah.
to get to.
And yeah, some people, I think sometimes people, the average guy will sometimes not put in the effort into athletics or just putting time and effort into their body because they're like, oh, it's just genetics. And it's like, no, you do have to put in some effort.
Yeah.
Right. Like when I met you, well, I think I was already losing weight back then, but there was phase of my life where I was slightly overweight.
Mhm.
And I didn't genetically get there. My lifestyle got me there.
Right.
And then I had a lifestyle my way. You know, you saw
Totally.
me. You saw me where I'd come in. I'd eaten. I don't recommend that route anymore, but there's genetics does play a part, but there's also the part that you play. And I think the average human being doesn't. They just say, "Oh, it's genetics, it's luck. I'm meant to be fat, or I'm meant to be
Right.
unathletic." And it's like, no, you. There's part in that, but that's for the 1%ers, right? That's how you separate.
Right.
That's why you get to the super league levels.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also putting in the work.
Yeah.
I think most people would just forget that they put in the work to get to that level as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I know with working with the rugby team in the area of Seattle, we've built affiliations with JBLM and like some of their special forces units.
Mm-hmm.
And the hardest guy out of all of them is like 5'8", 220 pounds.
From the rugby or special forces?
From the special forces guy. And he's like the man. Like you talk to anybody, you talk to the biggest guy in the room, he'd be like, "That I'm terrified of that guy."
Yeah.
And it's like they could be a person that's foot taller or like 100 pounds more. That's like muscle. Like we're not talking about fat people here. We're talking about like built people. And they would point to, that's the guy I want next to me if something goes down. And that guy, it just has that ability.
So special forces has like a rugby team that they bring out to play.
They have a rugby team, but like the guy, because that's how we built the affiliation. They wanted our president of our club like worked as the coach of like the Army and Navy like team that would play like internationally and things like that. So you end up building a relationship with this guy.
Cool.
Find out that this guy's like John Wick basically, and he's just gone for months at a time. You can't contact him, type of thing, and like he's one of those people who's like you meet him and you're like, this is one of the nicest guys I've ever met. This is one of the coolest guys I've ever met. And then you talk to somebody that's on his team and they're like, that dude's the hardest man like in this room.
Yeah, it's like Tim Kennedy. I'm sure you know who he is.
Right.
With UFC and special forces.
Right.
Super interesting book. So did you know in college you want to be a chiropractor, or was that a little later?
So it was more like as I was rounding out like my senior year, and knew that like I probably didn't want to be an athletic trainer, like master in that. I was like, they don't have like a high level.
You don't want to be athlete next? He's crushing it.
Yeah, right.
He wasn't around back then to aspire to.
No, but it was not as lucrative of a profession as it is now. Like now there's like a shortage of athletic trainers in the whole US. So like it's a lot higher pay grades that you can get.
Yeah.
Whereas like if that was going on then, I probably wouldn't have done anything more than just been an athletic trainer. But I knew that I wanted to do more. I was like, PT's like kind of a joke. Learned like all of those parameters and protocols already. And at this time, there wasn't like a lot of like biomechanics, like science out there and like how the body moves. So I was just like,
fitness.
Yeah, and I was just like doing PT with athletes and like it's like they wouldn't get better. So I was like, okay, we're missing something here, obviously. So I was like, it was basically between like going like to medical school or going to chiropractic school. And I chose chiropractic because I don't necessarily believe in like the MD structure. We didn't have physiatrists like on the East Coast. Whereas like once I came out here and like met a couple physiatrists, I was like, oh, I would have definitely done this had I known that this was a route that I could go. It's physical medicine doctor.
Oh, okay.
So like as physiatrists, like you pretty much do everything that we do in our office, but you could also do like stem cells, PRP, you can prescribe
drugs. That's
drugs.
Something you still do, or you don't want to go back to college?
Oh, it would take me like another 7 years of school because you got to do like 3 years of medical school and then like a 4-year.
Yeah, I haven't heard of those guys.
So they're great. I mean, I know a lot of them. They do a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily consider an MD to do, but they're MDs. So like they do a lot of physical medicine, a lot of rejuvenation care, things like that.
So talk me through the chiropractor training, how long that is, and for someone that's interested in that world.
So chiropractic is.
Do you generally have to have a degree before you get to that point, or they don't care?
You have to have 90 credits of science-based schooling. So there's like certain things that you have to have, like anatomy, chemistry, organic chemistry, things like that. So I had to take organic chemistry and regular chemistry because I decided I wanted to go to chiropractic school like midway through my last semester in college.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is the next best thing. Like, I
Did
think I
you
have a
know
good.
someone or personally that was in it, or just from you thinking from your childhood?
From my childhood, like I knew, like we had a family friend who was a chiropractor. My dad like blew up some discs in his neck when he was like working a factory job, so he would go to the chiropractor like weekly, and sometimes he'd bring me. Eventually, they were like, "Does Lee want an adjustment?" And I got one, and it was like first time was like euphoric, like
Mm-hmm.
smile on my face for like the rest of the day kind of thing. And I was just like, and then in reflecting on that, like when I'm in college, I'm like, I've never had a major injury. Like I work with major injuries like all day, every day. Like, and I see them like on a almost weekly basis, like in high level play. Like, what's the difference between them and like somebody else that like doesn't get hurt? And I felt that like the biomechanics of the joints and things moving appropriately put less stress on the body. And I was like, that's probably like the next thing that I want to learn.
Mm.
So that fed into me going to chiropractic school after taking some prerequisites like through summer, um, which I think was good to take like 6 months off from like rigorous school,
Yeah.
working a little bit more too. Which I used to work as like a busser and server, like at an Italian restaurant,
Yeah.
um, which was pretty good.
Are there a lot of chiropractic schools, or are there just a few throughout this?
I think at the time there was like 11.
Okay.
There's more now.
Yeah.
But it's very specialized, and usually like my class size was like 40 kids,
Mm-hmm.
and like, well, I think it was
I should have
60.
done a little research before we did this podcast, but what's the ratio male to female you feel like in the industry?
It's probably like 2 to 1,
Mhm.
male to female. Um, but it doesn't necessarily like mean anything.
Yeah.
Like there's some female chiropractors that I know that are phenomenal.
No, I asked that because it's like in construction, it's like 95% male.
Mhm.
A lot of other industries, it's very high male.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that it's good or bad. It's just it's one thing that I researched to see what is the male to female ratio.
Well, I think it's like because it's a pretty physical job. It takes a lot of effort. Some people physically just can't do it. Like they don't have like the mechanics or like the technique or like the quick twitch ability to like do an adjustment well. Um,
So, are there in the chiropractic world now you see guns, now you see people doing different stuff, manual adjustments. Are there a few different frameworks that people operate under
yeah,
now?
for sure.
In college, do they teach you those frameworks, or is it outside of college that you go learn? Because now there's probably different competing theories where even people in the chiropractic world don't agree on.
Yeah.
Do they talk through that in college, or is that once you get out, you're like, are they teaching you the basics? I'm really curious. Like, what is it that they're teaching, and why do we have so much? Once you get out, you have so many different competing theories on how it actually functions.
Well, I would say that like school, especially medical school, teaches you how to pass the test.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't teach you how to be a good doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So like that comes from you, like your drive, your personally like what you want to accomplish. Like I'd say 2/3, 3/4 of like my classmates like were more ingrained on getting good grades because I thought getting good grades would make them a good doctor. Whereas like the other third to fourth was just like I want to be good at this. Like I want to show like results. I want to see results in people. I want to work with like my friends or like my patients and like get better with that rather than just like getting a good grade.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been like the type where I'm like I need a 4.0 to like be confident that I'm good at this.
Someone said C's get degrees as long as
Right.
you're learning.
Well, it's like that was yeah. Like one of the sayings we had in school is you can't spell DC, which is Doctor of Chiropractic, without D's.
Yeah.
So like if you got a D, it was like a passing grade, which is
Yeah.
phenomenal to me. I don't know how that works out. I never got a D, but there were people that did and would move on, and like some of them are really successful, good chiropractors
Yeah.
now. It really doesn't matter. I had a buddy who failed his first board exam 6 times,
Mm.
and he's one of the best chiropractors that I know.
Yeah, because there's a difference between book knowledge and actually working in
Exactly.
person.
I mean, there's a couple.
So
of
how long is that course or that training?
So like chiropractic school is like 3.5 years.
It's a long time.
It's 10 trimesters, so it's like 3 1/3 technically. But it's long time. Like the school I chose, like you start adjusting after the first like 4 months. Like once you pass like your first classes, you start to adjust. So that was why I picked the school I went to, because I was like, well, I need to be good at like doing chiropractic adjustments. I don't need to like do all this other crap for like 2 years and then have like 6 months of like learning actual chiropractic.
Yeah.
I want to do this from the start and get better at it. So when I graduate, I know that I'm going to be good at it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not usually the type that's like a natural at anything. Like I can have some natural ability, but I'm not necessarily good away. It takes work for me.
Mm.
But I kind of like that process of like going through that, getting better, seeing the improvement, and having people tell you it's better, and just putting the work in, which I think is from wrestling, realistically.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like what's interesting, like for my boys, and I think about their sports, it's nice that they just happen to be decent at basketball,
Mm-hmm.
but the goal is for them to learn principles that they can then take on to other areas of their life.
Right.
So you do that with wrestling, right?
Wrestling and team sports, even like working, like I wasn't necessarily good at football. Like once I got into high school, I was good like throughout middle school, like as a youth. And then like once kids started getting bigger, I'm not winning the collision. I'm only 5'6",
Yeah.
155 pounds. When I was in high school, I was even smaller. I grew 3 inches my freshman year of
Yeah.
college.
Being
So-
short, we're both short. It's like you can either you can find that depressing, or you just find other things
Right.
to be good at.
But the team atmosphere of football was like very enjoyable for me. Like all my buddies played. I had met some of my best friends that I'm still like best friends with through
Yeah.
football in high school.
But you then took those skills that you learned, because that's my hope for my boys is the skill of going and dribbling for an hour. It's boring,
Right.
but put in the work, because that skill
Yep.
will then translate into real world. Sometimes there's things that you do that are boring.
Mm-hmm.
You still got to put in the work.
Well, it's knowing your role in the team
Yeah.
too, which I think bleeds into like corporate or like work life too. Like if you know your role and you do your role exceptionally well, then the whole team benefits off it.
Yeah. So you were able to translate the things you learned from sports into life.
Yeah.
And once you were finished sports, were you still, obviously you look fit, so you still kept training, just probably not to the same level you did when
Oh, not nearly as much. I think that I still look fit because I trained so many hours in my youth.
Yeah.
Whereas now, like I might work out like 2 or 3 times a week, unless I'm hiking, then I'll do more.
Yeah.
So, but that's weather dependent. I'm not like a rainy weather hiker.
Yeah, I don't do that either.
So I like to see the view. I like to get like once you get to the top of the mountain, so to speak, you see the view, you get your reward, and then you go down. You're happy with yourself.
Yeah. So 3.5 years, I think a lot, chiropractic does get a lot of bad rep from people for whatever. I think a lot of it's just they don't understand, or
Mhm.
just a lot of misconceptions. You fear what you don't know. I think it is becoming more popular, more mainstream. I don't know if you're feeling that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the veteran will now pay. Like
Mhm.
when you can get the government to be on board and pay for it, then you know that there's, at least they believe, the government believes it's legitimate. Where I don't know if they believe that
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago.
Well, like there was a war on chiropractic from like the American Medical Association for a long time. Preventative medicine in general, or like alternative forms of care in general. Like still you see it today, like acupuncture, massage therapy, PT, chiropractic. You can't just get as many of the visits as you want. Whereas you could see your MD every day if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And the insurance company won't care.
Right.
And I think like that taboo that was created through media has pushed people away from preventative medicine for so long, and now it's starting, people are realizing like, well, I need this more than I need to go see my doctor like 4 times a year.
Right.
Like personally, I don't really like going to the CNMD unless there's an issue. Like,
Yeah.
I hate hospitals.
Me too.
I see a lot of nurses, and it's just like a lot of, like if you go to the hospital, like you're closer to death than you're not, right? Like, so I'm like, I don't want to go to a hospital ever.
Yeah.
Like I had to spend a overnight when I broke my ankle, and I was, the entire time I was there, I was like, I just want to leave.
Yeah.
Like it smells like death in here. Like I'm surrounded by people that are like way worse off than me. I just have a broken ankle.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know who Peter Tia is?
Yeah.
So he calls it, his version of healthcare is healthcare 3.0.
Mhm.
Right? Healthcare 2.0 is like acute injury. Please go to them so they can help fix your acute injury.
Mhm.
When it comes to quality of life, they're not the ones, because it's either pills or usually medication
Right.
that they want to give you.
Well, it's reactive care,
Yeah.
right? Like they're treating the symptoms, they're treating like a disease process. And we're not going to get into like all what we think about that necessarily, but
Yeah.
preventative actions, like whether that's for health or for like something in work or like making sure you don't hit a catastrophic point
Right.
is more important
Try to
than
keep going
reacting
upstream
afterward.
to what's causing it versus downstream to why is this thing happening.
Right.
Yeah. So once you finish chiropractic care, it sounds like you're what's cool about it with most 4-year degrees is you don't actually do the thing you're learning, right? You go get a business degree, but you don't actually practice business.
Right.
You just have a degree.
Yeah.
But in chiropractic, you're actually doing the thing while you're training.
Yeah.
So once you have that certificate, is there a certificate and degree?
Yeah. So you get like a doctorate in chiropractic because it's anytime you have 7 years in school, you're going to get a doctorate, like for a certain discipline, right? So the last year of our chiropractic training, we're in the clinic where we're working with patients that aren't just students, working with people that actually have active pain. They're coming to our clinic because it's probably a cheaper option than going to see somebody else because we're students. But because of that, you learn how to like navigate that aspect of things where you're like talking to people, you're learning more about them as an individual, you're finding out
harder
what's
to adjust more overweight people than it is non-overweight?
Not necessarily.
No.
Some of the easiest people that move are like way bigger. You'd think that they'd be hard to move. It's more about like your technique and your positioning of the patient than like using a crazy amount of force. If you have to use a lot of force, then there's something that you're probably missing, or that's something that you need to address first.
Yeah. So the last year, a lot of on hands training, you're saying, and then how did you end up? Or I guess what was the next step after that?
So after that, like you have like your last 3 months, you can do like a preceptor kind of position where you're like more in New York, like it's very limited. Like all I could do was shadow a doctor, learn from them like how they go about patient care. In New York, I knew I didn't want to work there because you couldn't do like any like the rehab stuff or soft tissue work that we do in Washington and get compensated for it. Whereas like our typical appointment is anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. Whereas like in New York, it's like that would hamstring you for like your like how much you could make like at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You got to see a lot more patients, higher volume.
Kind of like the joint that's here where it's just
pretty much. Yeah, like you go and get an adjustment and you're in and out. In New York, it's like they'll probably put a heat pack on you, put some electrical stim on your back for 10 minutes, and then they'll come in, adjust you, and that's your appointment.
Yeah.
So, a lot different than like what we do here.
So you were doing some research and you saw that Washington State you could provide different type of care.
It was between like Washington and Oregon for me. But as soon as I visited Seattle, I was like, it's green here, it's beautiful. It's like doesn't snow very often. Like it's a lot different than Buffalo where it's like snow like 7 months a year. So it's just that lifestyle change and like knowing how I wanted to practice like fed me into moving across the country.
So you had no other connections here other than
I had zero connections.
And then so how old were you when you came out here?
25.
25. And then was this the first company you worked with or did you work with another?
This is the second company. The first one I worked with was similar style of practice where you spend an hour with the patient.
Did you just like call them and they're like, hey, I just got my degree.
Well, initially, like I had my ex-girlfriend at the time, she was working and I had the ability to just get my licenses, like figure out how I wanted to go about where I wanted to go. Luckily, had a couple friends out here that graduated before me and they were just like, hey, check this place out. Like, this is like the style that you want to work. And I'm like, yes, that is the style. And finding that place actually led me into working with the rugby team. So in 2016,
were you playing rugby at that time as well?
I wasn't playing rugby because it was just too busy. Had I gone to a different college that had a rugby team, like Life West or Palmer or something like that, I probably would have been playing rugby like while I was learning. But I didn't have the guidance like within the rugby community in New York because it was relatively new. To know that I had those options realistically. If I had known that I had the option, I definitely would have taken it because very passionate about rugby, wanted to stay like in sports. Also had gotten myself into some predicaments where removing myself from the situations that I was in Buffalo actually was probably like one of the best things that happened to me was just getting out of that hometown feel, being around people that you're with all the time, getting into trouble because you're doing dumb shit.
Yeah, I think sometimes people young adults sometimes it's like, dude, just go have a change of scenery.
Right.
Sounds like you did that. You lived in New York for 25 years.
Mhm.
Go do something. Go make your own decisions. Go because I'm thinking about this for my someone that in my family. He went from when you're a child, you live in your parents' bubble,
Mhm.
right? It's not right or wrong. It's just that's reality,
Right.
and then you go from there and you go to college. That's another bubble.
Mhm.
It's not real life. It's just a
Right.
bubble. And then you went to another bubble for chiropractic. So
Yeah.
you went from one bubble to another bubble to a real bubble, which isn't real life,
Right.
right? And then now you moving to Seattle, that's getting out of all those bubbles, and now you're creating your own life.
Right.
And for young men or women, it's like, especially the guy in my family, he went from his parents' bubble to college bubble, and that did not work. And now he's back with his parents as a 22-year-old, and it's like, dude, you have to go become your own individual
Right.
because you living with your parents is you think it's helping, but it's not. They're a
Right.
safety net.
Mhm.
Like you have to go do something. And I've done podcasts with other people. They don't go do the gap year. They
Mhm.
go. You don't have to go super crazy, but they just like one dude just went to South America with no
Mhm.
plan or Central America, no plan. Just I'm going to buy a one-way ticket to here and see what happens. And I think
Right.
not everyone needs that in their life, but I think that's highly beneficial, especially for someone that's stuck in life.
Mhm.
Have a change of scenery. Go do something that you all you know is half of the next step, but you don't know the next 10 steps
Right.
because life will happen if you let it happen, if you take those steps. But if you're just
Mhm.
proverbial living in your mom's basement, it's pretty hard to get anywhere.
Well, it's growing pains.
Yeah.
Like you need to be uncomfortable to grow.
Yeah. I'm
That
sure it was slightly scary to come out here.
I was like really looking forward to it, to be
Yeah.
honest. But it was definitely like
Yeah.
you have those moments where like things aren't going as easily or as well as you think they would have gone.
Yeah.
Definitely took a lot more time than I thought to get my license and to find the practice that I wanted to work in.
Mm-hmm.
But things don't usually come on time, right? Like you have to be like more. You have to have that self confidence to like sustain through like the shit,
Yeah.
or you ultimately you're gonna revert back to the old habits and like the easy stuff.
Yeah.
And like getting outside your comfort zone is like very important for growth. So you whether it was intentional or not, like going through that stuff, I think galvanized me as a person and really honed like my goals. To which like in 2016, like the team I work for now, Seattle Rugby Club, they won the national championship. There was 12 members on their team that played for the USA Rugby team. The coach was a USA Rugby coach. I was like, I want to work with USA Rugby. I'm going to move out to
Did they
Seattle.
play the All Blacks in New Zealand and all those teams? Are they good enough to do that?
Not our club team, but a lot of those players did play the All Blacks and got smoked.
Yeah, so it's like they're probably like little JV guys over here.
Well, yeah, they're like some of the best rugby players that I know personally, and it's like it's just there's different levels to
Yeah,
it,
for sure.
right? Like they call them tier one nations. We're technically, I think, a tier two nation right now. It might be tier one,
Yeah.
Which I think would be kind of a joke when you compare it to like the actual top teams.
Right. It's like
Um,
men's basketball. We now we're not dominating teams, but there's decades where we would just dominate
Yeah,
teams.
I mean, you got like the teams in the '90s, like I can't remember the name of
Dream
the
team.
Dream Team.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they would just
like
crush guys.
that's like an all-star team for the NBA playing against people that have probably started
Yeah.
playing like maybe 10 years prior to that.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So you moved out here. How long were you at your first practice?
I was at my first practice for about a year. Just wasn't a good situation. Like looking back on it, it's kind of one of those situations that they like warn you about like in college, but like you don't really know it like until you're in it. But it also like I'm grateful for the experience because it led to me meeting like literally I had my interview and they're like, hey, like we probably want to hire you. And then they're like, can you come in tomorrow and talk to the president of the Seattle Rugby Club? Which I had a post-it note that I wrote out like Seattle Rugby Club. Like I was going to work with them. That was like something I looked at every day from like 2016, like after they won the national championship until I moved out here. And the goal was to work with them, probably feed into like working with USA Rugby, doing like pro circuit, and then maybe moving to New Zealand, working in Super Rugby, which to me is like the most exciting league in the world for rugby. It's I think the best players in the world.
You know AG1, right?
Yeah.
You've heard of that company? You know who started it?
No.
It's an ex-rugby player.
Yeah.
he started it because he had so many injuries from playing rugby. He eventually had to stop playing rugby. I don't know his full story, but
Mhm.
yeah, I thought it was an ex rugby player who
Well, it's
started it.
great nutrition out of that.
Yeah.
You can get into like the nitty gritty of like freeze dried vegetables and
Right.
things like that, but it's like ultimately, if you're not eating vegetables, that's probably a good way to go about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it was all those goals that I had set for myself that I thought were going to take years. I pretty much accomplished within the first year of being out here.
Nice.
So
He took the first step. It was unknown, but and I think so many people get worried about, is it the right step? Is it the best step? And it's like, dude, just take a step,
yeah,
right? Okay, that company didn't work out the way you wanted to, but it got you out here.
right.
And then once you were out here, then you're able to meet other people, which then led to other experiences. And I think so many young people get paralyzed with that,
Mm-hmm.
where they're so afraid to take that first step that it's like, well, I don't know what's going to happen after that.
Right. Well, you don't recognize that things are snowballing
Right.
until it's like you look back on it and be like, wow, I already did those things that I thought it's gonna take me years to do.
Yeah.
It's not really comfortable in the moment because it's like chaotic.
Because even with this podcast, you're guest 21. I don't know who guest 40 is going to be,
Mm-hmm.
but I know I'm going to have a guest 40.
Right.
It's going to happen. I just don't know who it's going to be.
Right. It's just keeping that wherewithal that like as long as you stick into doing the right things and you're doing things at your utmost with like your best capability, then it's going to work out. It's just having that vision and knowing what you want. But after like accomplishing all that, I was kind of like in like a lull series where I was like, well, what do I do next?
Yeah.
Which I've been developing over the past year and a half.
So how did you run into this company?
So I ended up going to a seminar like while I was at the old practice, and I met person that's affiliated with the clinic. She's a Pilates instructor, but she's like a longstanding patient of Dr. Annie, who owns Head to Toe. And during the seminar, she was like, "Oh, like I have a friend that like might be hiring soon, like just so you know." And I'm like, "Oh, well, I have a job, blah blah." Like at that point, I was still like, "This should get better." Like I'm only in my first year of practice, blah blah. But then like once, because I was on the pro rugby circuit at the same time, like working as an athletic trainer and doing chiropractic in the office, and I was actually making more money doing the rugby stuff than chiropractic at that
Really?
point. So rugby gave me like my lifeline. Like it was like it gave me the freedom to like pay my bills and to do all the things that I wanted to do. And chiropractic was like more like the B side of things at that point. So like when we made it to the national championship run, I pretty much was like, okay, like I'm not gonna stay at this practice at this point. Like there's something else out there. I don't know what it is yet. End up like talking to Annie like a couple months later after that seminar, and she was like, yeah, like you're great, we want you here. And like the energy was completely different. It was just kind of one of those things where you knew it's like this is definitely the next step. Which is usually how it goes for me. It's like you might not know what's going to happen, but as soon as you see it, like you just know like immediately.
Yeah.
So that led to me working here for like the first year I was here. I was working with the pro rugby circuit still, splitting time, but it was a lot more manageable here, and it was a lot easier for me to grow here because they already had an influx of patients. They had overflow, and I would get a lot of overflow. Whereas at the other practice, can't say for sure, but I felt like a lot of the patients that would call for me like would be put to other doctors, especially the owner, which left a sour taste in my mouth. Like whether or not it's true or not, that was just my my thought on it, like what I thought was going on. So that like eroded a lot of trust. And eventually you get to the point where you just like hate going into work, which I never experienced in my life before that. When I was just like, I hate waking up and like having to go here.
Yeah. Some people live that life for 40 years.
Right. So I knew that I wanted to be out of that like within like a couple months of like feeling that sensation, because I was like, okay, like if this is real, like it's going to stick around. If not, it'll go away like as I'm starting to build more momentum.
Yeah.
Which I was seeing more patients then than I ever had been at that practice, but it still wasn't like a really sustainable way to go about it. Like I wasn't seeing enough patients to actually be happy with where I was at.
Yeah.
So luckily Head to Toe had an opening. I just fed in, and now I'm the most senior member here.
Nice.
So been here for 6 years now.
Yeah. So little recap. How old are you now?
32.
32. So has there been, and you may not have an answer to this yet, but has there been an aha moment in your life when something just clicked for you in regards to like, oh, that's that's how life works, or that's how this works. Have you had those kind of experiences the older you get? That's the question. And then another question is there advice you would tell to your younger self now that you're 32? Like if you could sit down with 21-year-old self and be like, hey, these are some helpful things to look out for. Um, let's start with those.
Well, the
And
first
they could be the
question,
same answer actually for both questions.
yeah, the first question, it's more so just being aware of like what's going on around you. Like there's synchronicities that'll occur in your life, and if you can recognize them, then you know you're either on the right path or it's just like maybe I'm not doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be like with when I had the interview at my old practice, and they were like, "We want to hire you. Will you come in for this interview tomorrow to talk with the president of the Seattle Rugby Club?" Which is the guy that I was going to contact anyways. Just wanted to get my chiropractic gig set first.
Mm-hmm.
Like once that happened, I was like, "Oh, this is definitely the right direction." Like things are snowballing immediately as soon as I hit this spot. So it's like you get to a point where you're like pushing a rock, pushing a rock. Eventually, it rolls over the hill and it starts going down at an increasing speed. So recognizing that like was I knew that that was the right situation at that time for me because everything that was my goal was lining up in just by meeting one person or one practice.
Mm-hmm.
So those synchronicities and just being aware of like that stuff coming in, it's like it's not like a fluke at that point. Like you've um kind of believe in the law of attraction a little bit, especially then I was like more of a law of attraction type person. Like when you bring things into your sphere and you recognize that they're there and you've been thinking about them for so long or like contemplating them, manifesting them, meditating about it, whatever it is, praying about it.
Mm-hmm.
When you finally get that thing, then you know that it's right. And that's kind of the way it is like in care too, like with chiropractic. Like if you give somebody like the right stimulus, they usually get better like immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And like they know that like, oh, this feels good. Like I've never felt this before. This is we're hitting something here. I got a patient yesterday who's just like, I'm getting some action right now, like while he was doing some rehab exercises, which basically for him meant I'm feeling things that I haven't felt for like years.
Mm-hmm.
Like my glutes are activating. I feel like I'm twisting better. My range of motion's going through the roof, like things like that. So I think ultimately, like when you have those aha moments, it's like, or the epiphany or whatever it is, it's like recognizing like what's going on around you and like being like, this is actually like what I was thinking about. It's just not exactly the way that I thought it would go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like with that, moving into like talking to the younger self, it's like first of all, I was offered to buy like 1,000 Bitcoins like when I was 18. For $20, like at a lacrosse party, like in college, and I laughed at the guy and told me he was crazy and blah blah.
Yeah.
And like it would have been a great choice, like at that point, like get a
Yeah.
1,000 Bitcoin for $20, I would not be working here anymore.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be working at all. I'd be
Yeah.
retired for life. So that would probably be like the one thing I would go back and tell myself. But also, it's more so just like stay on track and like I would more so try to coach myself on how to develop goals and to like reflect on my experiences because it's like if you don't reflect on like how things are going.
Do you journal?
Yeah, I journal a little bit. I more so just have like a lot of like mind exercises. Like I used to like read a lot about Albert Einstein, like having like his like how he came to his theories on like relativity or
So
like
you read a
whatever
lot.
it is. Yeah, so I read a lot. Not as much as I like, but when I do read, it's like I'll read a whole book in a day,
Mm.
kind of thing. Like if I like the content and the context of like what I'm reading, then I'm usually engrossed in it, and I'm going to finish the book out within like a shorter amount of time than would be typical.
I haven't asked this question. How does a man develop himself?
Man develops himself. Well,
Because
first of all,
the reason why I asked that question is I seem to be connecting with more and more men who some of them don't know they're mature, but some of them actually know they're mature.
yeah.
And so, how do you mature deliberately?
Well, I knew I was very immature. I always told myself like once I'm 25, I'll have my shit together.
Do you acknowledge that when you were young?
Yeah, I did a lot of dumb shit. Like I said, I'm
Like
a
what?
line pusher here. Like I've been arrested more times than I'd be willing to
Really?
like admit. I've been in jail a couple times.
Was alcohol part of this?
Definitely like substance stuff in general, absolutely. But it's more so just like I think that was more just like that fuel of adding like those substances, like whether it's alcohol or marijuana or
Yeah,
something
if
like
you're
that.
already immature and you add accelerant to it
Right.
through substance that doesn't help the
You
situation.
just do more dumb stuff, right?
Yeah,
So getting myself into trouble like was my own doing. Like
right.
always in my life, it's like if I have a problem, it's usually myself that caused it. Like that's the way I reflect on it. Like I did something to bring that into my
Have you ever
life.
gone to therapy?
Yeah,
So you have been to therapy. Do you
yeah.
think therapy helped you become more self-aware?
I think so. Like I think the big issue like with the discrepancy on therapy is people think it's going to fix them.
Right.
Whereas it's more so just going to give you the ability to reflect and bounce ideas. It's all about the intention, like in life, which that's what they say about chiropractic too, is like it's your intent that is like the driving force for like what you create or like how you affect something. So like your intent is like super crucial. Like if you're just living your life where um, I would say like in college I was borderline like alcoholic just because most college kids are. Um, it's if you're doing that stuff, you're numbing yourself
Why do
to
you think
like
so
the
many
ability.
kids fall prey to it? Substance abuse.
I think it's the first um, essence of freedom that they get. So they get to choose to do something that they're told not to do.
Do you think I was, for me personally, was I just lucky enough to not have fallen into that? The substance, because I treated my body like I don't even drink Coke, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't drink Coke when I was even as a teenager
Mm-hmm.
because I was just like, no, I'm an athlete first,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to do any of that stuff. Not because I thought it was wrong. I just
Mm-hmm.
literally knew that will impact my ability to train.
I think the people that you model your life after you have a bigger effect on
Yeah,
you
my
than you
parents
think.
weren't into that stuff at all.
Yeah, like if your parents aren't into something or you don't have like somebody in your life that you look up to that's not into that, then you're not going to do it.
Yeah, most people not get it. I'm finding now most people who get into substance abuse, someone else that they kind of knew
Mm-hmm.
introduced it to them, and they're like, why not?
Well, I think for me as well, like because like what I was saying, like my parents were not necessarily strict, but like very protective. Like I didn't go to like parties in high school and like get it out of my system, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had friends in college that like partied throughout high school, and like by the time we were halfway through college, they were just like, I don't really feel like doing this anymore. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's out of my system. Whereas for me, it was like the first sense of freedom of like, oh, I have this. Like this is my own place. I can do whatever I want. I can have a big party, a big bash.
Yeah, and like for my kids, I because we homeschooled, our kids are pretty sheltered. They're
Mm-hmm.
in a pretty unique bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just talking to my wife yesterday about as our kids get older, we have to provide them with an opportunity to express freedom
Mm-hmm.
so that they don't go the route where once they're out of our bubble completely,
Mm-hmm.
they just make a bunch of poor decisions.
Right.
And so that's something me and my wife are thinking through as our kids get older. It's yes, we have boundaries, but we still want them to express freedom when they're with us so that when they are 18 or
Mm-hmm.
whatever and they're out of the house, they don't go that extreme route when they're like, screw everything my parents said. We're just going to do these substances because we can.
Well, it's at least like knowing how to do something. Like if something's not good for you, it's knowing like
Because
if
you knew
you,
it wasn't good for you in
yeah,
college.
like you know for sure. Like I said, like in high school, like I was,
Maybe because you didn't play a sport in college because you played in high school, right?
I played college, and there's big drinking culture with college rugby. Like we weren't good at rugby. We were really good at partying and winning
Yeah,
in the
I
third
just
half.
yeah, it's so sad because I'm sure you've seen the signs. Alcohol is so terrible for you,
Hmm.
and yet we made it such a thing where it's almost like if you don't drink, you're weird.
Well, that was a big social like crutch.
Yeah,
Like especially when you're 17, 18, and you're like meeting people you don't understand or know. It's like a comfort position where you could be like, well, at least we're all drinking together. Like we have this in
how do
common.
we how do we get people to realize what can we replace that with for young adults?
I think it's more so teaching people how to do it responsibly rather than like avoiding it 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but alcohol literally has zero health benefits. And they're
Well,
finding that more and more.
you see, like there is like wine can have some
I know
benefits,
with
right?
spiritual and all that stuff, but
Yeah.
it's like that's a stretch.
Like if you look,
It's like smoking for the nicotine. It's like
yeah.
you don't need to smoke.
But if you look at like European drinking culture versus American drinking culture,
Yeah,
or like anywhere around the world, it's very vastly different.
yeah,
Like it's very like you have a glass of wine at dinner and like you're talking about your life and
yeah.
this thing. It's
It's very
more to like,
social, but yeah, it's just alcohol is so prevalent. It's just like, was I just lucky that I just never fell prey to that? Again, I didn't go to the. I was married when I went to college, so I'm not going out and partying and doing all that dumb stuff.
Mhm.
that most college kids were doing.
Right.
I had a kid when I was in college, so it's like
Yeah.
I grew up. I guess I just was forced to grow up faster than most people did. So
Hmm.
I had responsibilities, and people generally don't have responsibilities unless it's school.
Right.
But yeah, it's just so prevalent where it's like, how can we make it a culture where alcohol isn't the norm, isn't the cool thing, rather it's the. I mean, we kind of did that with cigarettes, where we're like,
Mhm.
don't do it.
Yeah.
How do we get alcohol to that point where kind of a thing where they're, it's sad because cigarettes is kind of making a comeback
Hmm.
with vaping,
Yeah.
but it's like people still kind of know like don't smoke, but alcohol is not at that level where it's like
Yeah.
just don't do it if you really don't.
Well, I think it's just one of the like to the way we go about it is like you can't do this until you're 21 or you can't do
But
this at
people still
all.
do it.
Yeah, people still do it because it's they can't it's not legal, right? And it's fun to do bad things.
Yeah,
Like ultimately at the end of the day when you're a
we just have
kid,
a health. We as a society we have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol.
yeah. I
Which
mean, I rarely drink now. I rarely drank when I was in high school, but once I got to college and everybody was drinking, it was just one of those things where it's like I'm part of the crowd. I'm gonna be good at this because I like to be good at whatever I'm doing.
yeah, hopefully I can instill in my kids not make that part of their life. But unfortunately, it seems to be a big part of people's lives and sad. But to answer for you to answer the question, like how did you get mature? How did you grow? Did you just simply grow out of it? Was it through therapies? Was it through self-reflection?
I think it was more through like reflection and loneliness. Because like once I got to chiropractic school, I had no friends. You had to make new friends. You're in a completely different area of the state. I was like 2 hours away from my hometown. I could go back whenever I wanted to, but
Mhm.
whenever I would go back, I would fall into those old habits of like going out partying and being like that. And it's like then you get back to school and you're like, I'm hungover. I can't do my work. I don't want to be like this. Like I have stuff to do.
Mhm.
So you just learn like through the reflection process. I hiked a lot by myself, but I started hiking when I was in chiropractic school because it was around Ithaca, a lot of good hiking spots down there.
Mhm.
And that loneliness and that like being alone and being comfortable like in your own skin like that. I remember telling myself initially like when I was going on like my first couple hikes is like you have to do this alone. Like you have to be comfortable and happy being by yourself doing these things that fulfill you. You don't need other people's happiness and like fulfillment to be fulfilled yourself, which I think like more of like that self-reflection and self-empowerment is more the important part rather than like searching for togetherness or like what would the term be? Um, feeling comfortable like because you're doing everything that your friends are doing.
Mhm.
Um, you want to do things because they're driven intrinsically rather than extrinsically.
Yeah, I was forced to grow up because I had married. I was married and I had kids. So that forced me to grow up.
Hmm.
You grew up. What forced you to grow up was self-reflection and looking at your. You're looking at the output of your life,
Hmm.
and you're like, I don't like this.
Well, I was very self-destructive when I was
Yeah.
younger, and like you already know, like you have like a despair. It was like like first time I felt despair, I was just like, I never want to feel this again,
Yeah.
and it was like entirely because of my actions that I felt it.
And I think most people don't get to that part of my actions.
Hmm.
When someone feels lost or despair, they want to look external and blame everyone else
Hmm.
versus you went internal and realized, no, I have a part to play in this.
And I think that comes back to like doing youth sports and like wrestling. Like wrestling, you're one on one. If you lose, it's because you lost.
Right.
Like nobody helps you on the mat. Like
And
you
that's
can't.
something I'm trying to teach my kids now when something happens. We don't get mad at them, but just I want them to own up, be like, oh, I did that.
Yeah, self accountability is very important. And
Mhm.
like you can make excuses. Like there's always an excuse. It's just whether or not it holds weight.
Was
Like
there an age when you, looking back now, when you feel like you made that switch from being immature to mature?
I think it was like throughout my college, like Cairo college, like
Like mid 20s.
career. Yeah, because like I went to Cairo school when I was like I think I was 22 when I started. Um,
Did
and
you feel, I don't feel this from your story. Do you think you had a rock bottom moment?
oh yeah,
So you did have a rock bottom moment.
multiple. Yeah, I was very self-destructive. I did things that like put me in positions to not accomplish my goals and dreams. And once I realized that, I think I made my dad cry once because of like shit that I was doing to myself. And he was like,
What do you think you were? Again, I'm not a therapist, but were you running away from something? Do you think because of your parent, like, what do you think caused you to do that?
the self-destruction.
Yeah. Did you come up,
I
were you able to answer that in therapy?
never talked about it in therapy, actually.
Really?
I never did therapy, like,
The reason why
pretty
I ask,
recent with therapy.
the reason why I ask is because I do have a desire to start working with young men,
Hmm.
and I'm not going to go tell young men to do what I did,
Hmm.
to go get married and have kids at a young age,
Yeah.
because a lot of people do that and then they end up with a bad marriage,
Hmm.
divorce, and now you have kids. So, all right, now I'm not going to recommend that to most people.
Hmm.
Thankfully, me and my wife, we were able to work through. Like, we got married young. She was 19.
Hmm.
She had a kid when she was 20 with me, and it's just like we were married at the time. But I don't know if I would recommend that route for most men,
Hmm.
because most men will will not get better. They'll
Hmm.
get worse, and then you get a divorce, and now you have kids.
Hmm.
So I want to hone in on you to be like, you hit rock bottom. How do we help young men now that are, can we help them skip some of the dumb stuff?
Hmm.
Or did you have to go through that dumb stuff? Or what pain? Usually, if you're, they talk to ultra runners, be like, what are you running away from?
Hmm.
Right? When you run marathons and ultra marathons, you're generally running away from something,
Yeah.
right? Because once you get past 5 miles, it's it's not about fitness anymore,
Right.
right? And so, what do you think was causing you to do that self destruction? Were you think you were in pain, emotional turmoil? I don't know. I don't know.
It was I think I was angry.
At who?
Um, Probably just like the circumstance of my life, angry that feeling deprived of certain things, like certain experiences. I think anger is more so.
Are you angry at a person? You think, like parents?
Um, I was mad at my mom for a while, like when my parents got divorced. Um, but I also like saw my parents and like as like the authority that like was holding me back from doing things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think ultimately I had to go through the crap that I went through to like learn like there's a line where you can go too far. You can't just do whatever you want. You like can't just do things like out of purely from a form of pleasure.
Right.
Like you have to have a goal and like what you want with your life. Do you want to just be like this drug addict like partier like your whole life that like never amounts to really much, or do you like want to be like grand and like help things out? Like now I have like my real why for like my life now is like I want to create generational wealth for like the generation beyond me, like my nieces and nephews, the rest of my family. Like I see myself as having the ability to make everybody in my family comfortable.
So how did you get to that point? Because you weren't that guy. Were you that guy at 25?
Yeah, I think I've always been that. Like I've always like part of the reason why I do chiropractic is because I want people to hit their potential. I want people to be able to experience that and to like do everything that they want to do.
So do you think? And I don't know the answer to this. Do you think sometimes? Again, I think about my kids. Sometimes do people just have to go through the crap, or can I'm trying to say, not you don't have to go through the crap because you can learn from someone else's.
Yeah.
I can like the wisdom is learning from someone else and
Hmm.
saying, "Hey, they went through that crap. I don't have to."
Yeah.
And so, or is there some things in life you just kind of have to go through, and you can't learn it from someone else's experience?
Well, I think it's both. Like the human experience is like nothing that we've been through that's been tough is unique to us.
Correct.
Like somebody has gone through that problem
And probably
before.
worse.
Yeah, and probably worse, right? So I think being able to reflect on that and to accept that, like, because acceptance is hard. Like accepting that you're doing the wrong things, or like accepting that like maybe you won't be the cool kid anymore because if you don't do these things. Um, like I was just in a very like in college, especially like that my friend group, we were like chaotic. Like we loved the fact that we were chaotic and we were proud about it.
Some of that's hormonal, right?
Yeah.
The testosterone and all that.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, we there's so many young men that are struggling right now.
You have to understand that like what's sustainable and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
And some people you have to like myself personally, like I have to experience like what I don't want to realize like, okay, like this is how you avoid that, or like do these things to try to get here.
But wisdom, and as you get older, right, you're going to be able to now learn from other people's experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like my child will never have to stick his hand in the fire. I don't have to know that's not good.
Right.
And so the more you can do that, the more you can be mentored, the more you can learn from other people's mistakes. I think the faster you can get through life. So it's like, thankfully for me, I don't have to go run an ultra marathon to know it's probably not the best thing.
Right.
I did 2 marathons, and now reflecting, it's like, yeah, I don't need to do that anymore.
Right.
But you give me hope because there's a lot of men that are struggling. You worked out of that relatively young, where some men never don't.
Right.
Or you're not married, you don't have kids yet, but you still matured. And what do you think caused that maturity?
I think it's just reflecting on like your actual like passions and like what you want.
What was there some internal things that you did as well? Was it books, reading,
reading,
or like just getting tired of your current situation?
I'd say a little bit of both. Like
there's let's take a look at yourself. Early 20s. There's probably a lot of men in that stage. Would we just tell that guy, hey, just get through the suck, or we can? I guess what I'm trying to get at, how do we get someone to speed up that process of hitting rock bottom? Maybe we can't avoid it.
Right.
How do we speed up that process where it's like, hey man, I've been there, I've done that. It doesn't have to suck for that long. My optimism would say, hopefully we can just avoid it.
Right.
I'm finding that's a hope. Most people do have to go through some kind of, not everyone, but people do go through a rock bottom. My thing is, how do we get them to speed that process up so it doesn't have to take up so much of their life?
Well, there's always going to be like peaks and troughs, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to hit the bottom to go up and bounce, right? Like a bouncy ball can't go higher unless it bounces off the ground first. So for me, it was like finding out like what my actual, like where my drive came from in life. It's like, I think my family was always proud of me and always told me I was doing the right thing, and it was always like accepting of like what I was doing because I was doing the right stuff. And then once I started doing the wrong things, to see like their sadness out of that, and like knowing that like I created that in them.
When you made your dad cry, how did that make you feel?
Oh, it was terrible. It was like, what? I don't even think I've ever seen my dad cry before. That was like the first time. And that was
my kids everything.
I think it was like 19 or 20.
Yeah.
And that was just like, well, that's something I never want. That made me feel like awful for months.
Yeah.
And it like he'd never been not proud of me. So like for him to cry because of the situation that I put myself in, which probably made him reflect on like his past, and his brothers, like the ones that went to go to prison a lot and things like that. It's more so he probably thought, my assumption is that did all this work to try to avoid this, and here we are. We're right where I didn't want to be.
Yeah, I mean, for every parent, where I have 4 kids, there's that risk that when they turn 18, they could turn out to be monsters.
Right.
Right. You hope you instill the principles in them so they don't, but there's always that risk that.
Right.
And so it sounds like you were kind of mini monster for a couple of years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That was devastating. So my optimism would say, let's avoid that from young men. I don't know if we could have avoided that for you.
Well, I think I had to.
Or how do we speed that process up?
I think I had to go through it.
I would love avoidance. If I can't get avoidance, how do we speed that process up?
So I think I was aimless at that time in my life. Like I knew I was doing the right things, but I didn't know what I wanted to actually do like after college. Like that 4-year block of college was like a safe space bubble, right? And I knew I was in a bubble. I knew I could like mess up and still like dig out of it eventually. And that's something that sports always provided me. Like I think I'm a confident person, not because I think I'm the best at everything, but because I know that if I don't get something right or I'm not good at something, I can work on it and improve off of it. So that's where I think my confidence lies in myself. I'd say some people probably describe me as overly confident or cocky.
Yeah. It's generally people who have low confidence and low self-esteem that will assume everyone else is cocky and confidence.
Right.
And that's like, dude, that's a you problem.
Right. But in regards to like the avoiding like a problem is more so like having like defined goals and like ways to reach them. Like once I like realized like that I was being self-destructive, and like then you start to hear like, well, what do I want out of life? Like as a 20-year-old, like it's hard to like even manifest or like think about
Right.
like what you want in life because you don't even know at that point. Um, you know what you don't want sometimes, and that can help you build out like, oh, well, I do want this. So once you get into the reflection portion, you get into the goal setting and like you actually work towards that goal on a daily basis. I think it keeps you in line with and focused so that you don't veer off the path. Like, had I gone to the Air Force Academy, like none of that stuff would have happened.
Right.
Or maybe it would have happened there and it would have been way worse.
Well, alcohol is still a big thing in the military.
Right. Like maybe I would have got kicked out of college then. Like if I would have done the same things that I did in undergrad, I definitely would have gotten kicked out of the Air Force Academy.
Yeah.
Like not even like the second thought on that. It would have been guaranteed. Um, but I don't think I would have ever been exposed to the things that I like exposed myself to had I gone to that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like I don't think you can change what you're gonna go through ultimately. You have the will to like decide what your day to day is, but you can't always pick like where the stops are along the track.
Mm-hmm.
So some are really bad. Some are like, if you look at it like some people's problems, I'm like, that's not a problem.
Right.
But it is for them. So everybody's a little bit different. It's like, what do you want is really the most important thing. Like, in grand scale. Like, people always talk about like, oh, make like a 3 to 5 year plan. It's like, you need to have a goal like for your life. Like, what do you want to do like when you die? Like, how do you work towards that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, for me, like, if I could have a bunch of grandkids and like great grandkids either, and like we're all comfortable and happy, and we still like have a really close familial unit, like that's really important to me.
Well, you got to get the wife first. That's
Yeah, right?
we got to get a girlfriend first.
Yeah, yeah. Last one didn't work out as well as I wanted, um, but yeah, that's still like the grand goal though. Like I don't want to.
A good thing for men is you can make babies well into your
Yeah.
60s if you so you know who Tony Robbins is.
Mm-hmm.
He's like in his mid 60s and he's like a 2 or 3 year old.
Yeah.
Think about how she'll be the most optimal. At 3 years old, she's taking piano lessons. She's learning Chinese, and I'm like, dude, my 3 year old's sucking his thumb.
Right.
His 3 year old's over there. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how she turns out. Um, but I like to end this on my podcast with this question, and it's called the game of life.
Mm-hmm.
And to you, end this either with a sentence, a line, a phrase. Life is dot dot dot.
Mm.
Tough question, and I've only recently started asking it to people, and I don't know if I'll continue because all the other questions I ask you, they're much easier to answer because it's talking about your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I ask this question, it causes people to pause and to really think, and it's like I should probably prep people ahead of time, but I don't because it's like, well, we just talked about your life,
yeah,
for the past however long. So I don't know if I'll keep asking that question because it is like obviously I think about this a lot now, so I can come up with an answer. But for guests, it is hard because it's like, oh, we just talked about my life for an hour and a half, and now this guy's asking me this question.
I think life is transformation. Life is you change every day, and like you don't necessarily see it until you look back on it. There's a difference between being alive and living, and like you want to find like the things in your life that make you live more than anything, like where you feel alive. That's not destructive or anything like that. It's not dangerous to others or yourself. But I think ultimately life is transformation. Like you have to be willing to change. You have to accept that things are going to change, and you have to build off of that. That's how you stay forward, and like that way you don't get upset if things do change. Like you already expect change to occur. Change should occur. Like that's growth. Life is growing ultimately.
So to add on to that, I learned this framework recently, and it's been really powerful. Like you said, we know change is happening. It's going to happen. And so to break that down further, change happens in three ways. It's forced upon you, you show up tomorrow and they fire you. We could argue you had a part to play because you didn't do your thing, but it was forced upon you. Force can be accident, or change can be accidental. Mean you have a conversation. Hey, what protein powder do you take? I take blah blah blah. Okay, I'll go try it out. So that wasn't something I set out to like do. It's just in conversation with someone I can change. And change can be deliberate in the fact that I'm going to personally develop myself to change. And so what I ask someone is, knowing that change is going to happen, and there's three ways that it can occur. Looking back on your life or where you're currently at life, how do you see change happening in your life? And if someone says it's either forced or accidental, that means you aren't doing much to change your life. And maybe you want to focus more on self-development versus letting other people change you.
Yeah.
So when I heard that framework, it was really powerful because it's like, yes, change will happen, but I get a say in that.
Yeah.
And if you're finding in life where you're not getting a say in change, you probably, because when it's forced upon you, those people could do it kicking and screaming. When it's accidental, cool, yes, random things will happen. You'll meet someone, you went to seminar, random things happen. So I now plan for random things. I go someone as far to increase the surface. People say you create your own luck. You increase the surface of random things happening by getting out there, right? If you're proverbially living in your mom's basement, the chance of something random happening is so slim.
Right.
When I'm putting myself out there, telling people I have a podcast, come meet with me, what am I doing? I'm increasing the chance of random things happening. But then the third layer of it is I'm also deliberately changing through the input that I put into my body, whether it's things that I listen to, things that I talk about, things that I try, with our body. So I think that's really powerful. That change is going to happen, but you also can play a part in that if you so choose to, which a lot of people don't.
Well, life's incidental. Like, you have little events that stack up into big events. Like, I have a lot of faith. I believe in God. I'm Christian. I think one of the biggest, most powerful things for me is just accepting the fact that, like, as long as you're doing the right stuff and you have faith that it's going to work out, it's going to work out.
Yeah.
It's just that when you go through the muck, sometimes it's hard to like have that clarity and see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
But as long as you're walking in the right direction and you are, like you've objectively like know that you're doing the right thing, not subjectively, it's objective. Then things work out in your benefit. Usually you can make your own luck. I believe in that 100%. Like when I was younger, I would say I'm unlucky. Whereas realistically, it's like, no, you're just doing things that you shouldn't do. Like it's not unlucky that you went through this scenario.
Yeah.
It's like you put yourself in that scenario and then it just happened. So I don't believe that anything is random realistically. I don't think there's coincidence.
Yeah, random is more, you don't always know the why.
Right.
I think some people get caught up in knowing the why or trying to understand the why. And I don't necessarily need to know the why of stuff, just how and the what. That's the science, right? Like, why do I need to eat protein to get bigger muscles? I don't care about that. It's how and what. It's the how and the what.
Yeah.
And people get bogged down so much with the why that it's like, dude, there's a creator. That's how things are designed. And if you try to get too far into the why, I think you can drive yourself crazy.
Well, it's just not always clear.
Right.
Like you have to accept the fact that the answer is not going to show itself right away too.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does. I'd say like when it does, it's like pretty euphoric. Like immediately in that instance, like what I was talking about when I was interviewing for the first job that I had. Like I knew immediately, like, oh, this is exactly what I'm supposed to do, and this snowballs. And that's like a very powerful feeling in itself. Like you just know you're on the right track, you're doing the right thing. You might at that time not feel like that, but you're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. When you get positive feedback, I'm getting it more as I get older in life. It's really cool to get positive feedback on an action. Sometimes it can be years or decades later that you're like, oh, I guess I'm glad I did that. But when you do something and you get relatively quick feedback on that positive behavior, it's pretty interesting. I know I was going to end with that question, but I had a few more just dealing with chiropractic. For someone that's interested in that field, what do you enjoy about it? Or if someone's thinking about it, I guess, what do you like about being a chiropractor?
Yeah, I like the complexity of it. Like you're never going to see the same thing day in, day out. Um, you get to meet people, you get to work with people, you get to understand them. And the more you can understand them and the more they understand what you're doing, usually the better the outcome is. And understanding themselves. Like oftentimes, like it's transformational in here because people have an epiphany of like, oh, this thing's not good for me, or this thing's not good. Or they're like, the empowerment that people can create is like, that's like my favorite thing. Like when somebody realizes like, this isn't like my back pain isn't like the end of it. Like I'm not going to have this the rest of my life. I can affect this with my own action. That's something that like really drives my passion. Like outside of like people hitting their max potential, it's also like teaching people that they can or that they have the power to do that. So like those are probably my two biggest why statements for why I like working as a chiropractor is like I like seeing people hit their potential as well as myself, and I like people being empowered and having that self-confidence that like I'm going to do this because I know I'm going to get this outcome. It's like ultimately there's a lot of faith involved with that, like whether that is in the grand scheme like religiously or like faith in yourself, which to see people empowered are it's generally a lot more, like even if you don't agree with them on things, it's more of a more beneficial to interact with people that are like self-empowered rather than people that are a victim to like circumstance.
Right. And let's think about where you like to be at 41. What does that version of you look like?
At 41, I'm semi-retired. Hopefully, own like 10 to 15 clinics around the U.S.
Nice.
Have like a big, like from a work standpoint, like expand off that, like be able to reach more people and help people learn like what we do here because I think it's really powerful. And I think if more people could treat like we do here, I think that they can help more people and they can change the context of chiropractic. But ultimately, it's like I want all of those things to have personal freedom of choice. Of like, I don't necessarily have to do this unless I want to. Like that freedom. Like I've always wanted to be free, right? Like whether that is like being able to just f off and like go out live in the woods for a month, like in Alaska or something. Like when it's summer, like that would be amazing. Like just having that freedom of movement and choice, which is a lot of people fall into the wrong where they're just like doing the same thing for like 40 years straight, like you said.
Right.
Like that's not true freedom. That's like slavery in my mind. And it could be from your choices that's it, or your circumstance. Yeah, like whatever it is. But like ultimately, like I want freedom and like the independence to like be self-sufficient and like do everything that I want to do that's fulfilling for me. Which at time of being like 41 would hopefully be with like kids and a family where I'm spending most of my time with them rather than like working all day every day just to make sure that they're provided for and they can be having a sustainable life. It's like being able to enjoy those times, like those small moments. Like I guess small moments are big ones, like where you can just sit around a table and like talk about your day, like with your family. Or you have like Sunday dinner. Like we used to have Sunday dinners when I was growing up, where the whole family would cover our house and we'd all just talk and like hang out. It's like that family is like a big thing for me. And being able to not have like less stress like in your life just because you're doing all the things that are fulfilling to you, not just doing them because they allow you to have like other things.
Yeah. Last question, I promise. What are some common ways people can just, when it comes to like treating their body, what are some common myths or common things people can proactively do just to overall try to live pain free? Or are there common issues that you see that come in here and they're like you said, every person's unique in their problems, but are there some common themes where you're like, hey, if people can do, like there's one internet thing that went around for a while where like if you just do a dead hang, that will solve all your problems, right? And then now there's all this other thing, oh, if you have this problem, maybe you shouldn't do it. But are there some common things that if people just started implementing this in their life from a physical standpoint, do you have any thoughts on that?
So there's this above our anatomy lab at the chiropractic school. There's a big slogan as you walk into the doors of the cadaver lab, and it says "Movement is life." So like when you're walking, you're in a movement scenario outside that office, and as soon as you walk into that area where the cadaver room is, there's a bunch of death surrounding you, and that's not moving, that's not mobile. Um, the other analogy that I would give is like a stagnant river is toxic, right? Like if the river's not moving, then the water is slowly deteriorating, becoming more bacterial, becoming more of a death rather than living. So moving in general is like the thing. If you don't use it, you lose it is like one of the dumbest cliches, but it's actually rings true for
Yeah, it's funny. Most cliches, if you really think about it, actually have a lot of truth in it.
Yeah.
But then they lose their meaning because they sound like cliches.
Right. I mean, you don't use it, you lose. That could be for like anything in your life. That could be like, if you don't use compassion, you're probably not going to be compassionate like to people. Like, and sometimes like the scenario is going to call for that, or empathy. Like, if you don't lift, then you're not going to lift strong things. Like, you're going to lose that ability to lift. Like, if you don't run, then you're not going to be able to run. Like, all of a sudden, like people that come in here, the vast majority of general population. I mean, we see a lot of athletes in here, so it's not necessarily them, but they're not moving. Everybody that we see, regardless, is not moving to their potential. They've lost some part of their movement that is creating their pain and their dysfunction, or and then their feelings towards that. So you want to be able to reflect on your movement and be like, this is good or this is bad. But like the more you move, the more you notice when things aren't doing what they should do. So to not move at all because something hurts is not necessarily a good thing. But if it hurts to a certain point where you can't move, then obviously you need to take action on that.
Yeah.
And that could be for pain in the body, or that could be for pain in like any scenario, realistically. If something is constantly creating stress and you're not changing it, then that's insanity. Like, you're waiting for something to just manifest out of nowhere. You're not taking action to fix it. So the more action you can take to affect something, it might not work initially, but eventually you're going to find the thing that you need to fix whatever you're trying to fix. Or that thing goes away and you totally alter into a different scenario where you're like, oh, well, I want to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really like that. Well, I appreciate it, Lee.
Yeah, no problem.
Great having a conversation with you, and I'm sure we'll continue being friends throughout the years, and hopefully you get the wife and the kids. I have a wife and 4 kids, and they are the most important people in my life. And well, it's interesting when you talk about sitting around. Like, we are blessed in that we eat almost every meal together.
Yeah.
And that's not common. Like, we have to tell my kids, like, this what we do right now, where we have 3 meals together. Like, I'm blessed in a job where I get to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner with my family. And it sounds like it's so trivial, but it's so powerful that we get to do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, those are the most important people in my life. But I now have enough capacity not just to love them, but I want to share what I have with other people, as far as like, I have enough capacity to now love on other people, because I know what I have at home is really powerful.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's nothing. I absolutely love my, you met my boys, but it's super fun. Like, at the stage where they're at now, every stage is awesome. But as they get older and they're doing stuff, and I'm out there, like, I was running with Isaac the other day, and he's actually in better shape than me, and it's crazy. And it's like, I get to do that and be that with them in their teenage years. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite activities to do is break bread with people.
Yeah.
Like, whether that's family or friends or whatever, like sharing a meal with somebody. I don't know what it is about it.
Hopefully not a McDonald's.
Yeah, like good food. Good food and good conversation is like really all I need to feel fulfilled.
Yeah.
Like, ultimately. So I think it's a very powerful thing. Society's gotten away from that a lot more. Like, being a 90s kid, I feel like we were one of the last generations that did that regularly. We would eat dinner together pretty much like until like high school. Then my parents were divorced, so it was a little bit different. But you always had like those moments. Those are some of my fondest memories looking back on my young life and childhood, is going over to my cousin's house and like having Christmas dinner, or like just having everybody come together, sitting around a table, because everybody's equal, and the conversation changes pretty drastically if you've got different varying age groups, right? Like, me as like a 5-year-old sitting at the adult table talking with them is like a lot different perspective than like my 70-year-old grandmother.
Yeah. And then for any single girls, it sounds like you're available, you're on the market.
Yeah. I'd say so. I mean, I'm working on a lot of things right now, so I'm kind of probably hard to tie down, but
the right one comes around, huh?
Yeah, they'll come around eventually.